The Battle of Kasham, also called the Battle of Fields, erupted into a fierce fight for survival on February 7, 2018, when U.S. Special Forces and their Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF allies, faced a relentless assault by Russian Wagner mercenaries and pro-Syrian government troops. In a dramatic confrontation, 40 U.S. soldiers, heavily outnumbered by 500 enemy fighters, found themselves fighting against tanks, artillery, and continuous waves of hostile forces in a desperate struggle to hold their ground. For weeks, U.S. intelligence had been tracking a troubling buildup across the Euphrates River, where pro-Syrian forces and Russian mercenaries were amassing, silently preparing to strike. The warnings were clear. The region was a powder keg, ready to ignite. But when the attack finally came, it hit like a thunderbolt. At 10 p.m., the night erupted as tanks roared into motion. Artillery shells began raining down, and pro-Syrian forces launched a coordinated attack on the U.S. and SDF forces at the Conoco gas refinery. The U.S. soldiers, hunkered down in the refinery's burned-out ruins, found themselves trapped in a nightmare. Every moment was a test of endurance. The incoming barrage was relentless, artillery and tank fire shaking the earth, sending debris and fire into the sky. The mercenaries and Syrian forces were closing in, their tanks crawling ominously closer, and it felt as if the entire world was collapsing around the outnumbered U.S. troops. As the Wagner Group and Syrian forces closed in, the U.S. troops tapped into their survival instincts. The roar of 50 caliber machine guns tore through the night, mowing down waves of advancing infantry, while javelin missiles blazed toward the looming Russian T-72 tanks. Despite their fierce resistance, the situation was growing dire. The small U.S. force was running out of time. Without reinforcements, the sheer weight of enemy numbers threatened to overwhelm and crush them. Air support. That was their only chance. And when it arrived, it did so with thunderous fury. The dark sky lit up with the arrival of F-15 E-Strike Eagles, AC-130 gunships, and Apache helicopters, their engines roaring as they tore into the enemy. Hellfire missiles and bombs rained down, exploding the Russian tanks into fireballs and shattering enemy formations. The enemy didn't stand a chance as the U.S. air power unleashed devastating precision strikes, blowing apart artillery positions, infantry clusters, and vehicles in a terrifying display of dominance. But the enemy didn't stop. Wave after wave they came. Each round of artillery sent shockwaves through the ground, each tank shell a reminder that one hit could annihilate everything. Every soldier knew they were walking the razor's edge between life and death. There were moments where the fate of the U.S. soldiers seemed sealed. One soldier scrambled to reload a 50 caliber machine gun atop a truck while artillery shells exploded around him, the concussive blasts knocking him back as debris fell from the sky. The eerie red glow of his headlamp made him a perfect target for enemy anti-aircraft cannons, which sent tracers flying directly toward him. "You idiot," he thought as he killed the light, narrowly escaping death as the rounds passed by inches from his head. Inside the trucks and behind the thin cover of dirt berms, soldiers gritted their teeth and fought the urge to think of the worst, because the worst seemed inevitable. But they kept fighting. As one tank shell whistled overhead, missing them by a stroke of fate, it felt like a stay of execution. They knew they couldn't hold forever. Then came the moment that turned the tide. The ground trembled beneath them, but not from enemy fire. This time, it was the thundering arrival of Apache helicopters. Wagner forces and pro-Syrian troops, advancing under the cover of darkness, were suddenly exposed to the devastating firepower of the Apache's chain guns and rockets. In minutes, the battlefield transformed into a slaughterhouse for the enemy. One by one, tanks erupted in flames, their smoldering wrecks illuminating the night sky, marking the sudden and violent shift in the battle's momentum. Yet even with their victory in sight, the U.S. troops weren't safe. Word came over the radio, a Russian bomber was inbound. Every heart in the command post seemed to stop. They had seen what bombers could do. Would it wipe them all out in a single pass? One of the team leaders gave a grim instruction: "Tighten your helmets, lock the doors. There's nothing else we can do." The seconds stretched on, the tension unbearable, until finally the call came through. The Russians had turned back the enemy forces, decimated, began to retreat. Bodies and burning vehicles littered the battlefield, the smell of smoke and fuel thick in the air. Between 200 and 300 pro-Syrian and Russian mercenaries lay dead, their assault utterly shattered by the precision and resolve of the U.S. forces. Not a single U.S. casualty had been reported. The sheer scale of the destruction left a deep silence in its wake. but the soldiers knew that victory had come at a price, psychological scars that would follow them home. The knowledge that they had faced overwhelming odds, tanks bearing down on them, and the ever-present threat of annihilation would forever be seared into their minds. Though they had survived, the weight of what they had witnessed would remain long after the dust settled. Please subscribe to the Intellectualist new YouTube channel, where we present insightful videos analyzing the current events shaping the world. Turn on notifications to receive the latest updates from the channel.